horse discovered a wounded Apache woman and led his cowboy to a life-changing fate. Jack Thompson had been riding the Arizona desert for years, and yet every time he set out with Dusty, his old chestnut mare, the landscape never failed to amaze him. The desert stretched endlessly, with golden sand rippling under the sun like waves in a sea, punctuated by jagged rocks and sparse clumps of sagebrush. Jack liked this solitude. The wind whistled across the cliffs, carrying with it the smell of dry earth and distant pine. Out here, a man could think. Out here, a man could be himself. Dusty was no ordinary horse. She had been with Jack for more than a decade, and in all that time, she had saved him more times than he could count. Sometimes it was as simple as sensing a sudden storm before the sky even darkened. Other times she would refuse to cross a dangerous ledge until Jack figured out a safer path. She seemed to have a mind of her own, but Jack trusted her completely. He often said she had the instincts of a hunter and the heart of a friend. That morning the sun had just started to peek over the horizon, painting the desert in pale pink and orange hues. Jack had been leading a small herd of cattle along a narrow canyon path. The animals were slow but steady, their hooves kicking up tiny clouds of dust. Jack hummed a low tune, the sound barely rising above the soft desert wind. Dusty walked beside him, her muscles rippling under her glossy coat. She moved with a calm confidence, the kind only an experienced horse possessed. Jack's eyes scanned the horizon as usual, looking for signs of danger, loose rocks, rattlesnakes, or even other cowboys who might stray too close to the herd. But suddenly Dusty's ears twitched sharply. Her head shot up, nostrils flaring. She let out a short whinny and veered off the trail, moving toward a narrow gap between two rocky outcrops. Jack frowned. Dusty had never done this before without reason. "Hey, girl, where are you going?" he called, trying to keep his voice calm. He knew better than to pull on her reins too hard. She needed to feel free to move. Dusty stopped for a moment, looked back at him, then nudged the gap with her nose as if urging him to follow. Curiosity and concern mixed in Jack's chest. Something was out there, something unusual, and Dusty had sensed it. Jack guided the herd to a safer spot, tying them loosely to a stand of juniper trees. He patted Dusty's neck. "All right, let's see what you've found," he murmured. The desert was quiet again, almost too quiet, and Jack felt a strange tension in the air. He adjusted his hat and followed Dusty into the rocky passage. The canyon walls rose sharply on either side, casting long shadows that made the narrow path feel even narrower. As they walked, Jack noticed signs of a struggle. Small branches were broken, and the ground was scuffed with footprints that didn't belong to the cattle. Dusty moved with increasing urgency, her hooves clattering softly against the stones. Jack felt a mix of fear and excitement. He had encountered many surprises in the desert, from lost travelers to wild animals, but something about this felt different, more serious. After a few minutes, Dusty stopped abruptly. Jack dismounted and looked around. That's when he saw her. Partially hidden behind a cluster of rocks, a young woman lay on the ground. Her clothes were torn, and she was clearly exhausted and in pain. Jack froze for a moment, unsure what to do. He had heard stories about conflicts in the area, and he knew the risks, but the sight of her vulnerability overpowered his caution. She needed help, and Dusty seemed to know it too. The woman's dark hair was tangled with dust, and her face bore scratches and bruises. She moved slightly, a soft groan escaping her lips. Jack felt a pang of sympathy. He had never seen anyone in such a state before, and yet something about her presence struck him. She was not just a stranger. She was someone who had survived something terrifying. And here they were, in the middle of the desert, far from any help. Dusty lowered her head, sniffing the woman gently. She let out a soft nicker, almost as if reassuring both Jack and the woman. Jack knelt beside her cautiously. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," he said in a gentle voice. The woman's eyes fluttered open briefly, dark and wary, but she did not speak. She was weak, too weak to respond, and Jack realized he had to act fast. He scanned the area, looking for a way to get her out safely. The canyon walls were steep, and the path back to the herd was narrow and dangerous, but Dusty seemed ready to help. Jack lifted the woman carefully, supporting her as she slumped over his arms. Dusty stayed close, nudging him when he hesitated, guiding him along the safest path. Jack marveled at her instincts. It was as if she could sense every hidden danger, every loose rock, every sudden drop. The journey was slow. Jack had to pause several times to let the woman rest, and each time Dusty stood patiently, almost protectively, her ears swiveling to catch every sound. The sun climbed higher and the heat of the desert began to press down on them. Jack wiped sweat from his brow but did not complain. His focus was entirely on keeping the woman safe and trusting Dusty to lead the way. As they moved deeper into the canyon, Jack began to notice small details about her. Even in her weakened state, there was a dignity in the way she held herself, a quiet strength that made him respect her immediately. He thought about how easily the desert could take a life. One wrong step, one sudden shift of sand, and everything could be over. But Dusty seemed to know exactly where to go, and Jack's confidence grew with every careful step. By the time the sun was high in the sky, they had made some progress, but the journey was far from over. Jack felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had set out on a routine day, thinking it would be just another cattle drive. Yet here he was, in a narrow canyon, guided by his horse, carrying a wounded stranger who depended entirely on him. He realized that sometimes the most extraordinary moments came when one least expected them. As they paused near a small patch of shade, Jack gently laid the woman down on a bed of soft sand and brushed Dusty's coat. "We'll get through this," he whispered, more to reassure himself than her. Dusty lowered her head, resting it near the woman, as if offering comfort. Jack couldn't help but smile faintly. Somehow, in the quiet desert, with nothing but rocks, wind, and the sun above them, a bond had begun between man, horse, and stranger that would change the course of all their lives. Jack looked around at the canyon walls, the shadows, the distant desert horizon, and felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. This wasn't just about guiding cattle anymore. It was about trust, courage, and responding when fate called. And for the first time that day, he allowed himself to believe that this unexpected path, chosen by Dusty and guided by instincts beyond his own, might lead to something remarkable. With Dusty at his side and the woman slowly regaining some consciousness, Jack felt ready for whatever lay ahead. He didn't know the full story yet, but one thing was certain: the desert had a way of revealing not just danger, but destiny. And on that morning, as the sun blazed over the canyon, Jack's life, and Dusty's, was about to take a turn neither of them could have predicted. Jack Thompson knew that finding the wounded woman was only the beginning of a much bigger challenge. The desert could be merciless, and he had no idea what dangers still lay ahead. As he knelt beside her, Dusty nuzzling her gently, he realized how fragile her condition was. Every shallow breath she took seemed a struggle, and the sun overhead made the heat even more oppressive. He knew he had to act quickly if she was going to survive. "All right, girl," Jack murmured to Dusty, patting her neck. "We need to get her somewhere safe. You know the way, don't you?" Dusty whinnied softly, as if in agreement, stamping her hooves and shifting her weight with quiet urgency. Jack took a deep breath and gently lifted the woman again, supporting her as best as he could. The weight was more than he expected, but he refused to let himself falter. The canyon path was narrow, filled with loose stones and sharp outcrops. Jack moved slowly, testing each step before putting his weight down, Dusty stepping carefully beside him. Every now and then he glanced at the woman. Her dark hair hung in her face, and her lips were dry. She had been through something terrible, and yet she remained quiet, as if saving her strength for the fight he knew lay ahead. Jack's mind raced. He had seen travelers lost in the desert before, and he knew how quickly dehydration and exhaustion could take hold. He also knew that wild animals might be nearby, attracted by movement or scent, but Dusty seemed aware of every hidden threat. Her ears twitched constantly, scanning the canyon, and she occasionally stamped her hooves to warn Jack of unseen dangers. He trusted her instincts completely. Hours passed slowly. The sun climbed higher and the desert heat pressed down on them relentlessly. Jack offered the woman water from his canteen, but she only shook her head weakly. He tried to make her comfortable on Dusty's back, adjusting her position so she could rest without causing her more pain. Dusty shifted her steps, sometimes gently nudging Jack toward a smoother part of the trail, showing an awareness that went beyond ordinary animal intelligence. At one point, a gust of wind blew sand into Jack's eyes, forcing him to pause. Dusty stamped impatiently, urging him forward, and Jack realized that she would not allow them to stop for long. He could feel her urgency, and he understood that she knew the safest path. Trusting her completely, he pushed forward despite the heat, sweat soaking through his shirt. The woman groaned softly but did not resist, her body limp in his careful hold. As they moved deeper into the canyon, Jack began to notice signs of the woman's struggle. Her clothing was torn, and the scratches on her arms and face told a story of desperation. He wondered what had happened to her, whether she had been attacked or fallen while traveling alone. He also wondered why she had not called for help. Perhaps there had been no one around, or perhaps she had feared the wrong people. Either way, he knew that she was counting entirely on him and Dusty. The canyon walls began to narrow, forming a natural corridor that made the journey even more difficult. Jack had to be careful with every step. Loose rocks threatened to slip under Dusty's hooves, and a single misstep could send them tumbling. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his focus sharp. He whispered encouragements to both Dusty and the woman, hoping to keep their spirits up. "Almost there," he muttered, though he had no idea how far they still had to go. Dusty seemed to sense his worry, and she slowed her pace slightly, allowing him to catch his breath while keeping the woman balanced. Jack noticed the woman's eyes fluttering open occasionally. She was weak, but she was aware of her surroundings. When she looked at him, her gaze was wary but not fearful. There was something in her eyes, a mix of trust and cautious hope, that gave Jack the courage to continue. The afternoon wore on, and Jack realized they had to find shelter soon. The sun would soon begin its descent, but the desert temperature would drop quickly after dark. Exposure could be just as dangerous as the injuries themselves. Jack scanned the canyon ahead, looking for a small alcove or ledge where they could rest safely. Dusty moved confidently, leading him toward a spot shaded by a rock overhang. It wasn't much, but it would protect them from the worst of the sun. Jack carefully laid the woman down on a patch of soft sand beneath the rocks. Dusty knelt nearby, lowering her head close to the woman as if offering comfort. Jack sat beside them, taking a moment to breathe and think. He reached into his pack for some food, tearing a piece of bread and offering it to the woman. She accepted it slowly, eating with small, careful bites. Jack felt a sense of relief. It was a sign she still had strength, however little. He spoke gently, trying to keep her calm. "You're safe now. Dusty and I won't let anything happen to you." The woman's eyes flickered toward him, and though she did not speak, Jack sensed a fragile connection forming. She trusted him enough to allow him to help. It was a small victory, but in the harsh desert, even small victories mattered. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Jack realized that they could not stay here for long. He would need to move again soon, and the woman's condition made every step a risk. Dusty seemed to understand, her ears alert, her body tense with readiness. She had carried them this far without error, and Jack knew she would guide them to safety if he followed her lead. Jack's thoughts drifted to the world beyond the canyon, the small towns, the river valleys, and the Apache settlements he had heard about from other travelers. Perhaps they could reach one of those places where the woman could receive proper care. But he also knew that the desert could change quickly. A sudden storm or loose rock could turn their path into a trap. He had to be vigilant, and he had to trust Dusty completely. Night approached, and the canyon began to grow colder. Jack wrapped a blanket around the woman as best he could, letting Dusty stand close to provide warmth. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the sound of distant wildlife. Jack stayed awake, watching the shadows and listening for any sign of danger. The desert was beautiful, but it was also unforgiving. He could not afford to relax for even a moment. As darkness settled fully, Jack reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. A routine cattle drive had turned into a rescue mission, and he had discovered a strength in both himself and Dusty that he had never realized before. He also felt a growing sense of responsibility for the woman, a quiet determination to see her safely through this ordeal. The bond forming between man, horse, and stranger felt unbreakable, and Jack knew that together they could face whatever the desert had in store. The woman shifted slightly, and Jack adjusted her position again, whispering softly. Dusty nickered, pressing her head gently against the woman's shoulder. For a brief moment, the three of them, man, horse, and woman, were connected in a way that words could not describe. It was a bond of trust, courage, and survival forged in the harsh beauty of the desert. Jack knew that the next day would bring new challenges. They would have to move carefully, and he would have to rely entirely on Dusty's instincts. But he felt ready. He had learned that day that survival depended not only on skill and strength, but also on compassion, patience, and trust. And in that quiet canyon, under the stars and the watchful gaze of the desert, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. He whispered one last time before closing his eyes, "We'll get you through this." "I promise." Dusty nuzzled him softly, and the woman, exhausted but alive, drifted into a troubled sleep. The desert was still, but Jack knew that tomorrow would bring action, and that every step they took together would be a step toward something greater, safety, understanding, and a life-changing journey none of them could yet imagine. The next morning, the desert sun rose slowly, painting the canyon in shades of gold and orange. Jack Thompson stirred quietly, careful not to wake the wounded woman. Dusty stood nearby, her coat glistening in the sunlight, and she seemed calm yet alert, as though she already knew the day's journey would be more difficult than the one before. Jack rubbed his tired eyes and checked the woman's condition. She was still weak, but she had slept well, and that small rest gave Jack hope. He carefully helped her onto Dusty's back, adjusting her so she could sit without putting weight on her injuries. Dusty nickered softly, shifting her steps to give the woman comfort. Jack patted the mare's neck. "You've got a good sense of what to do, girl. Lead us carefully." Dusty's ears twitched in acknowledgement, and she started down the narrow canyon path with cautious determination. The terrain quickly became more treacherous. The canyon walls rose higher, the path narrowed, and loose rocks littered the ground. Jack had to move slowly, balancing himself and the woman while trusting Dusty to find the safest footing. Every step was a test of patience and skill. The desert had a way of humbling anyone who thought it could be conquered easily, and Jack felt its challenge with every careful move. As they progressed, Jack noticed signs that someone, or something, had passed through this part of the canyon recently. Broken branches, footprints in the sand, and the faint smell of smoke in the wind made him uneasy. He tightened his grip on the woman, keeping her close to his chest, and whispered to Dusty, "Be ready, girl. Something isn't right." Dusty seemed to understand, her steps deliberate and slow, her ears swiveling to catch every sound. Suddenly the canyon opened into a wider area, revealing a shallow creek running through the rocks. The sight of water brought a small wave of relief. Jack carefully guided Dusty toward the edge so the woman could drink a little. She sipped cautiously, and he offered her more from his canteen. For the first time, she seemed a little more alert, glancing at Jack with a flicker of recognition and trust. As she rested, Jack scanned the area. The canyon walls cast long shadows, and he could see places where rocks might fall or where snakes could hide. He realized that the creek, while a welcome sight, could also be a trap if they weren't careful. He decided they could rest here briefly but would need to continue once the woman had regained a bit more strength. Dusty stood quietly, ever watchful, as if guarding them both. Jack reflected on the woman's situation. She had survived something dangerous, and yet she remained calm, even in pain. He wondered about her story, how she had ended up alone in the desert, what dangers she had faced, and why she had not been able to find help sooner. He wanted to ask her, but he knew it would have to wait until she felt stronger. Right now, their priority was survival. After a short break, Jack helped the woman back onto Dusty, making sure she was secure and comfortable. Dusty responded with patience, navigating the tricky terrain with careful steps. The path grew steeper, forcing Jack to climb slowly while supporting the woman. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and the sun bore down with increasing intensity. Yet every time he glanced at Dusty, he felt a renewed sense of confidence. Her instincts were guiding them forward, and he trusted her completely. Hours passed, and the canyon seemed to stretch endlessly. Jack's legs ached from the climb, and his arms ached from holding the woman. Dusty, however, showed no sign of fatigue, stepping carefully over rocks and around obstacles. Jack marveled at her endurance. It was as though she knew exactly what they needed to survive, and she refused to let anything stop them. Then, as the sun began its descent, a sudden sound broke the quiet of the canyon, a sharp crack of a branch, followed by a low growl. Jack froze, his heart pounded in his chest. Dusty's ears went flat, and she stepped in front of the woman protectively. Jack's mind raced. Could it be a wild animal? Or someone else who might be dangerous? He held his breath and looked toward the sound. Out of the shadows emerged a small band of figures, moving carefully through the rocks. Jack tensed, ready to defend himself and the woman if necessary. Dusty snorted and stamped her hooves, sending a clear warning. The figures paused, and Jack noticed that they were not armed aggressively. They looked more curious than threatening. Still, he could not take any chances. Jack raised his hands slowly. "We mean no harm," he called out in a calm voice, hoping to show he was not a threat. Dusty stayed firm beside him, her posture protective. The figures hesitated, then one of them stepped forward, a young man, perhaps no older than Jack, with wary eyes. He looked at the woman and then at Jack, assessing the situation. Jack realized they might be friendly, or at least not dangerous. "She's hurt," he said carefully. "We're just trying to get her to safety." The young man nodded slightly. as if understanding. He motioned for the others to stay back. Jack felt a small surge of relief. They had encountered strangers in the desert before, but this time it seemed that help, or at least understanding, was possible. The young man approached cautiously, keeping his distance. "She's Apache," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "She's from our people!" Jack's heart leapt. He had heard stories of Apache settlements hidden deep in the canyons, places few outsiders ever found. Perhaps they were close. He looked at the woman, whose eyes had widened slightly at the mention of her people. She seemed to understand, even in her weak state, that they were not alone. Dusty shifted her weight, sensing the change in atmosphere. Jack patted her neck. "Good girl," he whispered. "Looks like we're getting closer." The woman let out a small sigh, her body relaxing slightly on Dusty's back. Jack felt a wave of hope. After the long, exhausting day, they might finally find the safety and care she desperately needed. The young man gestured toward a narrow path leading further into the canyon. Jack followed, Dusty moving carefully over the rocky ground, carrying the woman steadily. The group stayed behind at a safe distance, allowing Jack and Dusty to lead the way while keeping watch. The canyon seemed to grow even more imposing as they moved, but Jack felt a strange sense of reassurance. They were not alone, and that made all the difference. As they walked, Jack thought about the journeys so far. He had started the day uncertain, not knowing what lay ahead. But now, with Dusty leading and the young man signaling that help was near, he felt a growing sense of purpose. He had been given the responsibility to protect this woman, and he intended to see it through. Dusty had guided them, instinctively knowing the safest paths, and Jack knew he owed everything to her calm, intelligent guidance. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. Jack could see faint smoke rising in the distance, a sign of human activity. He felt a rush of relief. They were close to an Apache settlement, a place where the woman could be cared for properly, and where he could finally rest. Dusty seemed to sense it too, quickening her pace slightly while remaining careful over the uneven ground. Finally, as twilight approached, the canyon opened into a hidden valley. Jack could see a small cluster of huts built into the cliffs, with smoke curling from simple fireplaces. The woman's eyes brightened, and she stirred slightly, as if recognizing the safety and familiarity of her home. Jack felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had made it through the harsh desert, relying on courage, patience, and the remarkable instincts of a horse. Jack led Dusty closer, easing the woman down so she could step safely onto the soft ground. Villagers appeared, rushing to help, their expressions filled with concern and relief. Jack explained briefly, pointing to the woman's injuries. Dusty stood quietly beside him, her calm presence reassuring everyone. The villagers quickly surrounded the woman, carrying her to shelter and offering water and blankets. Jack watched, feeling a mix of exhaustion and pride. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to relax. They had made it through the most difficult part of the journey. The woman was safe, the village was friendly, and Dusty had proven herself once again as more than just a horse. She was a guide, a protector, and a loyal companion. Jack knew the story was far from over, but the turning point had been reached. The desert had tested them, but they had survived together, stronger and more connected than ever. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jack sat quietly near Dusty, watching the village care for the woman. He realized that the desert had led him to something unexpected, not just a rescue, but a journey that would change his life forever. He had learned the meaning of trust, courage, and the deep bond that could exist between man, horse, and the unexpected paths of fate. Jack Thompson could feel his heart pounding as he followed Dusty into the hidden Apache settlement. The small valley was alive with movement. Children peeked curiously from behind huts. Elders emerged cautiously to see who had arrived, and smoke curled from the simple hearths, filling the air with the scent of cooking wood. Jack could feel the tension in the air. They were strangers here, and outsiders were not always welcomed easily. He kept a firm but gentle hold on the woman as Dusty carefully navigated the uneven ground. Every step was deliberate. Jack could see the wary eyes of the villagers, some of whom held tools or sticks, unsure if he was friend or foe. Dusty nickered softly, pressing her head gently against Jack's arm, and he felt a wave of reassurance. He knew Dusty's calmness would signal that he meant no harm. The woman stirred slightly, weak but aware. Jack looked at her and whispered, "We're almost safe. Just a little farther." She gave a faint nod, her dark eyes filled with both fear and hope. He realized how terrifying it must have been for her, alone, injured, and surrounded by strangers. Dusty had carried her here with steady determination, and now it was up to Jack to show that they meant no harm. One of the elders stepped forward, a tall man with weathered features and deep, watchful eyes. He studied Jack carefully, then looked at the woman, and finally back at Jack. "Who is she?" he asked in a calm but firm voice. Jack spoke slowly and respectfully, trying to explain without causing offense. "She is hurt. I found her alone in the canyon. I carried her here so she could be safe," Jack said. "I only want her to get help." Dusty stood nearby, stamping her hooves gently, sensing the tension in the air. The elder nodded slowly, but his eyes remained cautious. He gestured for Jack to keep the woman on Dusty's back while he spoke with others in the village. Jack followed the instructions, feeling every second stretch longer than the last. The villagers whispered among themselves, some glancing with concern, others with curiosity. Jack could feel their skepticism. He had known from the moment they entered the settlement that gaining trust would not be easy. Yet Dusty remained calm and steady, her presence reassuring everyone that Jack was not a threat. After what felt like an eternity, the elder returned. He spoke gently to the woman, and her body relaxed slightly, as if recognizing a familiar voice. Jack realized that she had finally reached a place where she was understood, where she would be safe. He felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The journey had tested him more than any cattle drive or desert trek he had ever undertaken. Jack dismounted and helped the woman off Dusty carefully. The villagers moved in to support her, guiding her toward a hut where she could rest. Jack could see that they were offering water, blankets, and gentle reassurance. He stood back, watching, his chest tight with emotion. Dusty nickered softly, nudging the woman one last time before stepping back, her job done. Jack patted her neck with a deep sense of gratitude. The elder approached Jack, speaking slowly and with measured respect. "You have done well. You carried her through danger. She is safe because of you." Jack felt a lump in his throat. He had not expected thanks, only the hope that he had done the right thing. But hearing these words, spoken by someone who understood the risks of the desert, filled him with pride and humility. For a few quiet moments, Jack simply watched the interactions. The woman's condition seemed to improve slightly as the villagers cared for her. Dusty stood calmly beside him, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Jack realized that this was more than just a rescue. It was a turning point, not only for the woman, but for him as well. The desert had tested his courage, patience, and empathy, and he had passed. Suddenly, the woman looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his. She gave a small nod, a gesture of trust and gratitude. Jack's heart swelled. The bond that had begun in the canyon, forged through danger and uncertainty, was now affirmed. Dusty whinnied softly, as if sensing the emotional connection, and Jack felt a deep sense of completion. But the moment was not without its final challenge. A sudden cry came from the edge of the settlement. A young child had wandered too close to a rocky slope and was in danger of falling. Without thinking, Jack sprang forward, guiding Dusty to the edge of the slope. Dusty responded instantly, moving carefully over the rocks as Jack reached the child just in time. The villagers gasped in relief as Jack handed the child to their parents safely. Dusty lowered her head, calm and steady, having anticipated the danger before it became critical. Jack felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The desert, the journey, the injuries, and the risks, all of it had led to this moment. He realized that courage was not just about facing danger, but about understanding responsibility, trust, and the connection between living beings. Dusty had shown him that intuition and loyalty could guide them through impossible situations, and he had learned to listen, to observe, and to act with care. As the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, Jack sat quietly beside Dusty. The woman was now resting safely in the care of her people, her breathing steady, her injuries being tended to. The villagers had begun to relax, moving about their daily routines, yet there was an air of respect toward Jack and Dusty. They had witnessed a demonstration of bravery, skill, and compassion that transcended words. Jack thought about the journey, the narrow paths, the loose rocks, the heat, and the constant uncertainty. He realized that every step had mattered, every decision carried weight, and every moment had brought them closer to safety. He had begun the day uncertain, but now he felt a profound sense of purpose. The desert had tested him, and he had risen to meet the challenge. Dusty nuzzled him gently, reminding him of the bond they shared. Jack smiled, running his hand along her neck. "We did it, girl. We kept her safe." Dusty responded with a soft nicker, her eyes reflecting the calm pride that Jack felt. For all her intelligence and instinct, she had been patient, strong, and unwavering. Without her, he knew they would not have made it. As night fell over the hidden valley, Jack realized that this moment would stay with him forever. The desert had shown him its dangers, its beauty, and its lessons. It had revealed the strength of a horse, the resilience of a young woman, and the courage that can arise when someone chooses to act with compassion and care. He understood that true bravery was not only in facing danger, but in caring for others, in protecting life, and in trusting the guidance of those who are loyal and wise. The woman slept peacefully, the village safe, and Dusty stood nearby, alert but relaxed. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of exhaustion lift slightly. He had faced the turning point of his journey, the moment when danger and hope collided, and had emerged with courage and trust intact. The desert had tested him in ways he could never have imagined, but it had also given him a profound understanding of life, responsibility, and the deep connections that bind living beings together. As stars began to twinkle above the canyon, Jack whispered softly to Dusty, "We've done something important today. Something we'll never forget." Dusty nickered in response, her presence steady and reassuring. Jack knew that this experience would stay with him forever, a memory of courage, connection, and the remarkable bond between man, horse, and the fragile but resilient human spirit. For Jack, the desert was no longer just a place of solitude and work. It had become a teacher, a test, and a witness to bravery. And as he sat beside Dusty, watching over the woman and the village, he understood that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with a simple act of courage, and a horse who knows the way. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the canyon, painting the hidden Apache settlement in pale gold. Jack Thompson stirred quietly, careful not to wake the woman. Dusty stood nearby, calm and alert, as if sensing that today would be a day of rest and reflection after the long, exhausting journey. For the first time in days, the desert felt peaceful, almost gentle. Jack looked around at the small valley. The villagers were already awake, tending fires, preparing food, and moving with quiet purpose. There was an air of calm and safety here that he had never felt in the desert. The woman he had carried through danger was asleep, wrapped in blankets and resting in the care of her people. Jack felt a deep sense of relief. Every worry, every moment of fear had led to this: safety, trust, and the knowledge that he had done the right thing. He approached Dusty, running his hand along her neck. "We did it, girl. We kept her safe," he whispered. Dusty responded with a soft nicker, pressing her head gently against his chest. Jack smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart. The bond between them had grown stronger than ever. Dusty had guided him through danger, protected him, and even comforted the woman in ways words could not describe. Without her, he knew they would not have succeeded. As the sun rose higher, Jack was invited to sit with the villagers for breakfast. They offered him simple food: cornbread, dried fruit, and fresh goat's milk. He accepted gratefully, sitting quietly as the community moved around him. There was no hostility here, only respect. The elders had spoken with him, and even the children now approached Dusty cautiously, patting her neck and brushing her coat. The mare stood patiently, allowing them to admire her without complaint. Jack realized that trust had been earned, not just for him, but for Dusty as well. When the woman awoke, she looked at Jack with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Her dark eyes, once filled with fear, now held recognition and trust. Jack helped her sit up, offering water and a small piece of bread. She accepted it carefully, her movements still weak but more confident than before. Jack noticed a subtle change in her expression, a sense of relief, perhaps even hope. After the trials of the desert, she had found safety, and he had been the bridge that led her here. The elders invited Jack to stay and rest for a while. He accepted, feeling the weight of exhaustion in his arms and legs. The woman had recovered enough to speak in a quiet voice. "Thank you," she said simply, her words carrying more emotion than Jack had expected. He nodded, smiling gently. "You're welcome. I'm just glad you're safe." Dusty shifted her hooves softly, resting her head on the woman's lap, as if confirming the bond they had all shared through danger and uncertainty. Over the next few hours, Jack learned more about the woman's story. She had been traveling alone when a sudden attack left her injured and stranded in the canyon. She had survived on sheer willpower and courage, but it was Dusty's instincts and Jack's determination that had ultimately saved her. Listening to her speak, Jack felt a deep respect for her resilience. She had faced danger without complaint, relying on strength and courage he could only admire. Jack reflected on the journey, from the moment Dusty had veered off the trail to find the woman, to the tense moments navigating the treacherous canyon, to earning the trust of the Apache settlement. Every step had been a test. The desert had pushed him to his limits, both physically and emotionally, and he had emerged stronger and wiser. He realized that courage was not only in facing danger, but in acting with empathy, responsibility, and trust, qualities that had guided him through every challenge. Dusty seemed to sense his thoughts. She moved close to him, resting her head against his shoulder, and Jack felt a profound gratitude for her. She had been more than a companion. She had been a guide, a protector, and a source of wisdom. Without her intuition and calm determination, the journey might have ended differently. Jack patted her neck gently. "You've done more than I ever could have asked," he whispered. Dusty nickered softly, her eyes reflecting a quiet pride. The woman, now feeling stronger, walked carefully beside Jack and Dusty as they explored the settlement. The villagers welcomed her warmly, offering food, blankets, and gentle words. Jack watched, feeling a deep satisfaction. He had helped her reach this place of safety, and now he could see the fruits of his efforts. The journey had been long and dangerous, but it had also created connections between him, Dusty, and the people who had taken her in. As the day passed, Jack began to understand the true impact of what had happened. The woman had survived a life-threatening situation. The settlement had witnessed courage and trust in action, and he had grown in ways he had never expected. The desert had taught him lessons that could not be learned anywhere else. Lessons about patience, empathy, and the bonds that form when living beings work together to overcome danger. Jack knew that he could not stay in the settlement forever. His life as a cowboy awaited, along with the responsibilities of guiding cattle and navigating the desert. But he also knew that the experience would stay with him forever. He had learned that true bravery was not measured by strength alone, but by the willingness to act with compassion and care. Dusty had shown him that intuition and loyalty could guide them through impossible situations, and he had learned to trust both her and himself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon, Jack prepared to leave. The woman, now rested and stronger, came to see him off. "Thank you," she said again, her voice filled with sincerity. Jack smiled. "Take care of yourself. You're stronger than you realize." Dusty nuzzled her gently, as if offering her a final blessing. The woman smiled faintly, a gesture of trust and understanding that Jack would remember forever. The villagers gathered to watch Jack and Dusty leave. Some offered small gifts, a piece of bread, a cloth, a token of respect, but mostly they offered quiet nods and smiles. Jack felt a deep connection to these people, strangers who had become allies through circumstance and courage. He mounted Dusty, feeling the familiar comfort of her back beneath him, and began the journey home. The desert stretched out before him, as vast and unforgiving as ever. But Jack felt different. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and he had emerged with trust, courage, and a new understanding of life's unexpected paths. Dusty moved steadily beneath him, her hooves kicking up small clouds of dust, and Jack realized that the journey had changed them both. They were no longer just a cowboy and his horse. They were a team, bonded by experience, intuition, and mutual respect. As he rode through the canyon, Jack reflected on the lessons of the journey. The desert had tested him, but it had also given him a deeper appreciation for life, for courage, and for the connections that form when people and animals act with empathy and trust. He thought of the woman, now safe, and felt a profound sense of fulfillment. His actions had mattered. He had made a difference. By the time he reached the open plains beyond the canyon, the stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky. Jack stopped for a moment, looking back at the hidden valley. The settlement was quiet, peaceful, and alive with life. He knew that this experience would stay with him forever, not as a story of danger, but as a story of courage, trust, and the extraordinary bond between man, horse, and human spirit. Jack rode on, Dusty moving steadily beneath him, the desert stretching endlessly ahead. He felt a quiet sense of purpose, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had learned the true meaning of bravery and compassion. Dusty had guided him, the woman had trusted him, and the desert had taught him lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. As the cool night wind swept across the plains, Jack whispered softly to Dusty, "We've done something good, girl. Something we'll never forget." Dusty responded with a gentle nicker, her presence steady and comforting. Jack knew that no matter where life took him, the memories of this journey, the trials, the courage, the bond with Dusty, and the lives they touched, would remain with him forever. And in that quiet desert night, under the vast expanse of stars, Jack felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had faced the unknown, acted with compassion, and emerged stronger, wiser, and forever changed. Dusty, faithful and intuitive, had been his guide, his protector, and his friend. Together they had carried someone through danger into safety and into the embrace of a community that would forever remember the courage of a cowboy and his remarkable horse.